Now, the curfew in Colombo that was imposed at 12 noon yesterday was lifted this morning at 5 a.m. Now, there's heavy police deployment at top spots in Colombo. I'm crossing over to my colleague Purnima Moli, who is live in Colombo, to give us more details on this. Purnima, what can you tell us about the curfew that's been lifted? Purnima, can you hear me? All right, we'll try to reestablish that connection. But in the meantime, the news that we're bringing you now is that the curfew that was imposed yesterday at 12 noon, it was lifted earlier this morning at 5 a.m. Now, I'm crossing back over to my colleague Purnima Murli, who is live on the ground in Colombo. Purnima, what I wanted to ask you is, now that the Colombo curfew has been lifted, could you give us details about the security, the heavy police deployment in top spots in Colombo?
Well, curfew was lifted at 9 a.m. today, and in and around Colombo, we don't find heavy security deployment. Security deployment is somewhere in places like the Presidential Palace, the Parliament, Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister's private residence, and now the interim president as well. And then we also have heavy security deployment in and around the Parliament. Parliament is where there are more and more army officers. There's an army truck that is stationed. There are army trucks stationed in and around the Parliament, because that's the most sensitive part, where protesters 2 days ago tried to storm the Parliament, and then clashes turned violent. There were 30 of them who were injured. All this happened late last night. In the morning, protesters tried to storm the Prime Minister's office, and later in the day in the Parliament is when they tried to storm. Therefore, heavy security deployment in and around the Parliament, because of the kind of clashes that broke out 2 days ago. And right now there are army trucks also deployed there, and there are at least 200 to 300 army personnel deployed. Apart from that, there are also special task officers deployed. And here, if you can see, if you go further down, you can find the police officers here. Inside, you also find the special task force. All of them are stationed in these government places, because they are afraid that some of the protesters may continue to storm these places if Ranil does not tender his resignation now that Rajapaksa has resigned. But curfew has been lifted in and around on the streets of Colombo. There are no police or security deployment, but only in these outside these government places, inside these buildings. These are the places where there's heavy security deployment seen. We'll have to wait and see if Ranil announces yet another curfew post noon, because noon to 5 a.m. For the last 2 days curfews were imposed. Today, will that curfew be imposed yet again? We'll have to wait and see. But Ranil Wickremesinghe has made it very clear in a statement that peaceful protests are okay, but he will not allow fascists to take over these peaceful protests. That was the statement that Ranil had said, and he feels that peaceful protests are now taken over by fascist groups, which is why violence and vandalism has been reported in parts of Colombo over the last 2 days.
All right, Purnima, stay with us, because I also want to cross back over to Abhishek Jha. Abhishek, you were earlier telling us about India's assistance when it comes to the financial crisis in Sri Lanka. Could you give us more details about that?
So India, the government has maintained that they are ready to support Sri Lanka. In fact, our External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, recently when he was trip to Tamil Nadu, he continuously said that India will be supportive of Sri Lankan people. However, they are also looking forward to a stable political setup, which is democratic in its concept. And they are soon going to have something, if the Sri Lankan people choose to have some democratic setup soon, it will be easier for them to facilitate more help, aid and grant and whatsoever. In fact, India has been extending a line of credit of over $1 billion to Sri Lanka in the last 6-7 months for a country of the size of Sri Lanka, where 22 million people. India has extended almost $3.8 billion worth of credit line or financial assistance in the last 6-7 months. This is a huge amount. But for more assistance to go there, one must have to have some person in the power whom the countries like India can have negotiation or talk to as to how much debt they can actually have, how much debt they can actually afford, because it has to be a sustainable model of partnership or collaboration also. Maybe Sri Lanka will have to open up more itself for more investment opportunities where Indian companies or other companies from other places also, other countries also can go and invest there and can help build Sri Lankan economy in a long-term sustainable model. So these are the few areas where Sri Lankan ministers or Sri Lankan leader, whoever will be in the seat of power in the next few days, will have to think and accordingly if we talk about International Monetary Fund or any international organization or countries who have been friends with Sri Lanka or allies with Sri Lanka, they will be able to extend further and long-term help to Sri Lankan people.
All right, Abhishek and Purnima, I want you to stay with us because remember, now that Gotabaya Rajapaksa is gone, remember he escaped essentially from Sri Lanka, went to the Maldives, and then he took a private jet yesterday and went to Singapore. Then in the evening, he handed in his resignation. Now, what exactly is next for the island nation of Sri Lanka? We're going to take you through that. Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe is currently the interim president. Apart from being the current prime minister, he is now the acting president as well. Essentially, this decision was taken by the speaker to make him the acting president after Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled the island nation. Now, there are hopes of the protests subsiding, but there is also heat on Ranil to stay. Why are there hopes of the protests subsiding? Because essentially the main demand of the protesters in Sri Lanka was that Gotabaya Rajapaksa resign. Now, there's also heat on Ranil Wickremesinghe to stay as well. Now, that heat essentially is going to stay because protesters also want his resignation. They don't want him as their prime minister or their acting president. They want him to go away too. Now, the parliament is set to meet in the next 3 days. They're going to be holding a session within the next 3 days. This was something that was announced by the speaker yesterday. Now, elections for the new president from the sitting MPs will be taking place within a period of 30 days. This is the information that we're getting about what is next for Sri Lanka. Now, Sajith Premadasa, he is the opposition leader in Sri Lanka, and Sarath Fonseca are the front runners to be the next president of the nation. Now, they, of course, are going to have massive challenges if they are elected, if they are taken into that position of running the country. Now, efforts are also underway to form an all-party unity government. This is something that we've been hearing for the last couple of days. Till now, there has been no headway with that. Now, as we mentioned, there will be an election from the sitting MPs to see who can be the next president. Now, beyond this, what's next for Sri Lanka is that there's a big focus on the IMF bailout package. Sri Lanka is currently facing its worst economic crisis ever. They have about 50 million left in reserves, which is literally nothing for an island nation, for a country to run itself. Remember, protesters, the reason that they're protesting is because they lack access to essential items like food, fuel, and medication. Now, we have some breaking news coming in.